Hello. Yeah, that one time. Greetings to everybody. Welcome to the Panorama panel decision for the spring 2018 semester. My name is Sid Walker, and I will be serving as the moderator for today's discussion. This panel series is an opportunity for GSW community members to come together and voice their opinions on topics relevant to immigration. With help from the panelists, we hope that together we will all engage in an intellectual conversation. The topic today is immigration. Through today's discussion, we will explore a series of questions pertaining to immigration. Some of these questions include the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, also known as DACA, the wall that has been proposed by President Donald Trump, as well as other similar topics. However, what we will best help to forward this discussion is you and the questions that you ask during the question and answer portion of this event. I would first like to begin by introducing the members of our panel. Then I will briefly explain the procedural details of the panel discussion. Our panelists today are, well, first, Ms. Elena Abamonte. Ms. Abamonte is an immigration attorney with over 30 years of experience related to immigration. Her experience includes 30 years working for the United States federal government in various roles associated with immigration. Most recently, Ms. Abamonte served as Deputy Chief Counsel for the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement at the Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia. In 2015, Ms. Abamonte opened Abamonte Immigration Law in Americas, which offers a full range of immigration legal services. Next, our next speaker is Mr. Trip Pomeroy. Mr. Pomeroy is a co-owner and CEO of Cafe Cappuccino Incorporated, Georgia's first 100% fair trade organic coffee company. In addition to the company's coffee house and restaurant in downtown Americas, Mr. Pomeroy also oversees their second roastery, Sweetwater Organic Coffee, which is located in Gainesville, Florida. Mr. Pomeroy first came to Americas in 1989 as a volunteer with Habitat for Humanity International, serving as the public relations coordinator for the 1990 Jimmy Carter Work Project, which was held in San Diego, California, and Tijuana, Mexico. During his time in Americas, Mr. Pomeroy became close friends with Lee and Bill Harris, who he later joined as partners in Cafe Cappuccino in 2004. Mr. Pomeroy has a BA in Political Science from Tufts University and an MA in International Development from the American University School of International Service. He also has more than 25 years of working experience in business and new venture development and management, international trade, sales, and marketing, and communications. He has lived and worked in Mexico and Paraguay, where he has met his wife and has worked on a variety of businesses, ventures in Argentina, Brazil, Italy, Taiwan, and China. He is currently rolling out a nonprofit organization, the Trading Partner Resource Network, to help connect United States consumers of Cafe Cappuccino's coffee directly with the small-scale coffee farmers who grow their coffee. Mr. Pomeroy has 2 college-age children, a black Labrador Retriever named Lola, and enjoys playing racquetball, landscaping, reading, and traveling to meet with the women and men who grow together Cafe Cappuccino's coffee. All right, so here's the procedure. Each panelist has been asked to prepare opening remarks about immigration. Once our panelists have made their opening remarks, we will transition to the question and answer portion of the event. During the Q&A forum, panelists will respond to questions from the audience. From the Q&A, we will have mobile microphone attendants. We would like to ask that anyone who has a question or a comment raise their hand, and one of our attendants will bring you the mic. In the interest of time, we would also like to ask that questions or comments from the audience be stated within 1 minute. Tonight's event is a Windows to the World sanctioned event. In order to receive credit, please be sure to swipe in with one of your Windows to the World representatives at the back room. You will also be sent the link to the Windows to the World program assessment, which must be completed to earn Windows to the World credit. Finally, this event is being recorded and will be posted on GSW's personal YouTube page. Without further ado, let's begin with our first panelist, Ms. Elena Albamonte.
Good afternoon. As he mentioned, I have over 30 years of experience in immigration law working for the federal government. I worked for the State Department as a citizenship lawyer starting in 1984. And then I worked for the Justice Department, Board of Immigration Appeals for 20 years. Then I worked for Homeland Security, ICE, at headquarters, and then also, as he mentioned, at Stewart Detention Center. Part of the reason I moved around a lot was when I first started doing immigration in 1984, the book was only this big. The statute itself was only this big. And I should have brought the book. It's now this big. That's how much the law has changed in the past 30 years. There have been a lot of new laws that have made it illegal to commit certain types of crimes. And for example, drug trafficking was always obviously a bad crime. But now, theft or shoplifting, in some states, if you shoplift, that's considered an aggravated felony, which means that you are permanently barred from ever coming back to the United States, whether you have children, a wife, or anybody that in the United States that you may want to live with or stay with. So the stakes are a lot higher than they were back in the day because the number of illegal immigrants has changed, and also, I guess, Congress is just kind of tired of all the criminal aliens. Just to kind of give you guys an idea of what happens when someone comes in the country illegally, there's really 3 ways that you can be illegal in this country. The first way is you come over the border just illegally at night, you're swimming over. There's a lot of places in some of the borders, Canada included, where there's no one around and you can just walk over, swim over, sneak over in some ways. The other way is you come over as a visitor or a student and you overstay your visa. Those people are just as illegal in some ways as the people that sneak over the border because if they stay longer than they're supposed to, they become illegal. The third way that people can come in is they come to the border and they say, I want to apply for asylum. And if any of you have ever heard political asylum, those are people that something bad has happened in their country and they want to apply for asylum, and the United States government paroles them in or lets them in to let them do their application. Well, what's happened is in the old days, those people would get paroled in and then they would be let free and they would be able to work or whatever while they were waiting for their cases to go through the immigration process. Now what's happening, it's very controversial, is that, and I would say the past 7-8 years, they've started detaining all of those people. And if they don't have a relative or someone that they can stay with, those people end up having to stay in jail for years sometimes while they're waiting for their case to make it through the immigration process. And 45 minutes from here, we have the Stewart Detention Center, which is one of the largest immigration detention centers in the country. It's also a national security facility, which means it has terrorists and other people that are considered very dangerous in that facility, in addition to people that just came over the border or maybe just, drove without a license. I mean, they keep them separate in separate areas, but they're still all in there at the same time. There's about between 1,700 and 1,900 people detained in that facility. It used to be an old state prison, and they've turned it into this detention facility, so it's a medium security prison, which means that, say you're a college kid from Guinea, and you decide that you want to apply for asylum, maybe you got beat up during one of the political demonstrations or something bad happened to you, You come over here, you come to the border, and you can end up being detained in there for 2 years. I have a client, he's been detained for 2 years, never committed a crime in this country, came to the border and asked for asylum, but under the current administration and even the prior administration, they're continuing to detain these people if they don't have ID, for example. That particular guy threw away his passport because he thought if he threw away, someone told him, oh, if you throw away your passport, they'll eventually have to let you out. Well, no, if you throw away your passport and they don't know who you are, they're not gonna let you out. So part of the reason he's been detained so long is because he didn't have ID. I'm hoping in the next 2 weeks he actually is gonna be granted asylum. That's the hope. It's already gone up on appeal and back, and I think the judge is gonna grant it this time. We have a new judge. So he'll eventually get out, but some people, I had another client that was there for 2 years, same thing, threw away his ID. He was from Pakistan. He never got out. He got denied asylum. He didn't want to appeal, and he finally ended up getting deported. So, and he was 23 years old. He spent 2 years in prison because he came in, even though that particular guy came in illegally, swam over the river and got in that way, whereas the other guy came in legally at the border. Both guys ended up getting detained for 2 years. So there's a lot of misinformation about the immigration process because there's so many different ways that people get detained, so many different ways that people get into removal proceedings. Just to give you just an idea of what happens, you may have known somebody that maybe got arrested for a DUI. A DUI makes you a danger to the community in the eyes of the government. So very unlikely they're gonna give you a bond, which means you might be at the Stewart Detention Center. You have to go through your removal proceedings before an immigration judge. If they deny your application, you have to appeal it to the Board of Immigration Appeals. That takes another 6 months, comes back, may go either way. People that are detained aren't necessarily long-term criminals, but they're nevertheless detained. In addition to those guys, we also have at the Stewart Detention Center people that have been in prison since the 90s. In the 90s, there was big drug crackdown, people that were trafficking in like heroin and some of these huge cocaine traffickers. There was a guy who's a big Colombian drug trafficker. He was importing cocaine in guava jelly, huge amounts of cocaine. And he was in jail for 25 years. He's from Colombia. He was a lawful permanent resident, had a green card, went in at the age of 33 or something, got out, and he didn't get out. They take him straight from D. Ray James Prison right to the Stewart Detention Center. He applies for whatever relief he can, which with an aggravated felony isn't much, and then if he gets denied relief, they deport him right out to Colombia. There's all kinds of different people in there. There was mafia people in there. Like I said, there's terrorists in there, and then there's people who just drove without a license. So, does anybody have any questions, or you want me to elaborate on anything in particular? What? Okay. I just kind of wanted to give an overview of the immigration process. As far as DACA is concerned, part of the reason that a lot of different parts of the government are upset about it was because it was done by executive order rather than by statute. I talked to you about how the statute is this big now. Every time Congress, and many of you I'm sure know, every time Congress passes a law, other congressmen put all kinds of other little things into the law that have nothing to do with whatever they're talking about. And it takes forever to get some of these things through Congress. And so they just went ahead and said, we're gonna try to help this little group of people. During that time period, the Obama administration was trying to not detain people that didn't have big crimes. So for example, say you drove without a license, they weren't detaining you. You might stay in removal proceedings, or they might close your removal proceedings temporarily, but they weren't deporting those people from 2012 until when President Trump got elected. Under the Trump administration, and part of the reason they did that was because if you only have $1 million, you want to spend all your $1 million deporting the people who are really bad criminals and not deporting everybody equally. You want to concentrate on deporting the bad criminals, and because it's just a cost thing. Under the Trump administration, of course, they're deporting anybody, no matter what happens. Also, a lot of people have heard people say that it's not illegal to come in it's not a crime to come in illegally. It actually is a crime. They don't generally, it's a federal crime. They don't charge people with it, but it technically is a federal crime to enter the United States illegally. There's also a separate crime, federal crime for reentry, which can get you up to 5 years in federal prison. So that usually only happens to people that just do it over and over and over again. Say someone's coming in and out 5 times, they've caught them 5 times, or if you're convicted of an aggravated felony and they deport you and you come back in, if they catch you again, you're gonna go to federal prison, probably for 5 years. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, okay, after him. Okay, that's what you were saying. I couldn't figure out what you were saying. All right.
Thank you. That was very interesting, though, with the law. Next, we will have Mr. Pomeroy. He will present next.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Just got a quick poll. How many people here are more than moderately passionate about the issue of immigration? I just want to kind of... Okay, and I'm going to assume, and you guys can correct me, that the rest are relatively neutral. Anybody want to challenge me on that? Okay. So I'm not neutral. Cafe Campesino is a fair trade organic coffee company for a reason. How many here drink coffee? Right. How many view coffee farmers as faceless, kind of Juan Valdez, Latino dudes? Is that kind of a fair characterization of how we might see coffee farmers? Thank you, yes. So I think one of the things that we try to do that's really important to Cafe Campesino, we try to humanize the people who grow one of our country's biggest segments in the market. We try to put a face and an identity to the small-scale coffee farmers, women, men, who work very hard to farm the coffee that we drink. And they get a very modest pay for the coffee they farm. And like the coffee market itself, they're often viewed and treated as a commodity. They're faceless. And I feel like in the immigration conversation, for those of us who don't know people who either came here illegally, people are here on DACA, people who have family, that immigrants, especially in this day and age, are increasingly portrayed as kind of faceless. And I think that's a mistake. I don't think it's fair. I think that if you look at the vast majority of immigrants who come in illegally, the vast majority are law-abiding. I recall that when I was growing up in DC and working side by side with landscapers in the early 1980s, mid-1980s, I was working with guys who swam across the river, the Rio Grande, to get into the States. I have friends who crawled through a sewer pipe to an El Salvadorian friend, a guy named Elmer, who came to the States with his wife with their baby on their back. I have a friend, Mario, who flew to National Airport in 1982 and got off fleeing Guatemala's civil war. And all of those people are law-abiding. They own houses now, they have family. Some were able to get asylum. Some had to work through other processes to get legal status here. But I think the debate that we see today about DACA families, the wall, has become this kind of cold yes or no. Like either you're for it or you're against it. And I don't think that it's that simple. It's such a big subject. I'm trying to kind of lay out where I feel the important points are. So my bio was supposed to be pruned, but I'm glad it wasn't, because in the 25 years that I've been working internationally, a couple things. I've met tons of people from other cultures, most who have come here legally, many who haven't come here legally. I've been in other countries. I believe I overstayed my visa in Paraguay when I met my wife. But through it all, thick and thin, when you think about this country and what this country is about, I think you really have to do two things. You gotta remember that we're talking about people, and then you gotta remember this country was built on the backs of immigrants, legal and illegal. And that's an important thing. My father was in World War II, my grandfather was in World War I, and the one thing that they constantly reminded us when we were growing up is that, the new blood that comes in from all these countries, these are people who are hungry, who want to improve their quality of life. Some may be economic refugees, some may be refugees from more complicated situations, war, other issues faced abroad, but the people who come here want to be here. They want to take advantage of the opportunities here. And I would say 25 years later, being a business owner, if I had to bet on somebody to work hard and be there every day, I would certainly look very favorably upon an immigrant, illegal or legal. There is a work ethic that comes. There are family values that come across the border that are important elements of immigration. And I think that they're overlooked in the debate. To put up a wall, the wall is a very complicated concept. You've got that border area between here and Mexico is very complex. It's very dangerous. Will the wall solve it? Will military intervention solve it? Yeah, we need to do something to keep the border closed, and we need to do something to keep the border safe. So it's not, do we put up a wall or not put up a wall, but what is the problem? What can we do what are the problems? And the problems are not illegal immigrants coming in. That's not the only problem. The other problems are people are dying in mass numbers. You've got ranchers whose property is being encroached upon, very reasonable frustrations and complaints. So it's complex. There's more than just yes or no. Put up a wall, don't put up a wall. There are people involved on both sides of the border whose issues need to be taken into consideration. When you talk about DACA, kind of getting back to, we have 2 DACA workers on staff. Hardworking, dedicated, good students, extended families here. The rug is being pulled out underneath their feet for primarily political reasons. They signed up based on it. True, it was an executive order, but they went, they provided all their data, they played by the rules, and now we've got this kind of black and white, yes or no approach towards a very complicated human issue, and people who revealed themselves and made themselves quite vulnerable are now subject to the possibility that they could be deported for a minor infraction, or if the program is just left to completely expire, which means they registered in DACA. As soon as their DACA permits expire, they're going to have to leave. These are kids who only know the U.S. They're among us. They're in this neighborhood. They live and work with us. And they're good people. And then in general, just immigration and how I view it as this whole national debate. As I've said, I feel strongly that, for me at least, and for Cafe Campesino, we have a strong commitment to trying to do the right thing and humanizing things like immigration, things like the coffee trade. So I feel like philosophically and morally, I have an obligation to make sure that the people who are suffering or struggling or who are in need, illegal or illegal, that I'm there for them, that I am part of the solution and not solely trying to put up a wall between us and them and dehumanize huge swaths of this country, huge population of people who are here making a contribution. But I would also say that practically speaking, as a business person, I feel like there's so much opportunity, again, to get away from the yes or no to how can we make immigration, and especially illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, my opinion is let's bring them into the system. Yes, we need to shut the border to make it safer. Yes, fair enough, it's against the law to come into the country illegally. I understand that. I would have problems if I wanted to go into Paraguay without a passport. But we've got a huge population here that has proven itself to be a huge contributor to this country. So it seems pretty reasonable to me that we should be able to find a way to charge both people who come across illegally, who are here now, and employers a surcharge, a tax, and bring people who are in here right now hiding in the informal economy because they can't participate in the formal economy, and bring them into it. Think about the opportunity in this country for people who are undocumented to get insurance, people to go above boards, people to buy houses, people to invest. There are a lot of ways, I think, if we find middle ground to address both concerns. Yes, the border does need to be closed. Yes, it's problematic when people come here illegally and then commit crimes. I'm certainly not excited about having felons roaming the streets who are undocumented. I don't think it's fair to the people who have come here to due process. But there's also a huge majority of people who are very law-abiding and who contribute. So we can't use one big blunt instrument to kind of cut everybody out. And I just think that there's a huge opportunity, if people start standing up for it, to find win-win solutions, to take into considerations everybody's needs, but never lose the fact that these are human beings who have a lot to offer this country. And I think if you look in Georgia a few years ago when the hammer was dropped on trying to kind of start to round up immigrants, the fruit was on the ground. And there weren't people to collect fruit, harvest our fruit, and bring it to market. I think that was pretty revealing about how short-sighted we can be in our attitude towards immigration and immigrants. So I guess my position is, I think there's a great opportunity economically for this country to incorporate the folks who are here. And I think that morally we have a responsibility, and I think the wall's an idiotic idea. And that human resources deployed to the border, fair enough. But the idea of some wall and the bravado that goes with it somehow solving the problem, I think, is extremely short-sighted. Thank you.
We will now begin to move into the question and answer portion of this event. If you have a question for one of our panelists, please raise your hand and one of our attendants will bring you the mic. To get things started, I would like to pose a question to either panelist. What principles and or philosophies do you think should guide our immigration policies as a nation? You can.
Hello? All right. I think as with anything that the U.S. does, I think that we need to abide by the Constitution and due process and fairness and justice. And as far as anybody that comes in, whether illegally or legally, they need to be provided with due process. If they are caught doing something wrong, they need to be provided with an opportunity to legalize their status if they were brought in as children. A lot of people are, even within the government, are very, very much in favor of what became known as DACA or even DAPA, although that was never implemented. But I do think that fairness and justice are the two things that we need to all, make sure that people understand that the U.S. is still friendly to immigrants and to refugees.
I would say too that there are kind of two practical issues that should be addressed. One is you kind of have what we do with all of the folks who are here already, and then how should we move forward? And I think guided by the principles, legal, moral, always being a welcoming country should guide that. And I think we need to be practical. And there's two steps to solve this thing: is figure out what to do with the folks who are here, and figure out how to move forward so that people want to come to the United States, so that we attract people who are hungry to work and contribute.
Does anyone else have a question?
Hi, my name is Maggie. This is a question for Mr. Pomeroy. I grew up in West Central Texas, and I grew up very close with people who did come across the border illegally. And I think because of that, I put myself in the more than moderately passionate area. But my question is, how can students get involved, and in what ways, what sources can they look to get out of that neutral mentality?
That's, I feel, that's a good question. I think that there are tons of opportunities to get involved. I'm thinking about how we get involved here. In our case, in Cafe Campesino, we have, like I said, we have the DACA employees, and they're the best source for us to go to, and they have network groups that meet to give updates to DACA folks and their families on what's latest developments in the program. I think in general with social media, finding groups, especially in Southwest Georgia and Georgia in particular, I think it's really using social media to find groups where people have articulated their stance one way or the other on immigration, DACA, the wall. I also think that people who are interested in learning more need to take a look at what their local state representatives, what their positions are, and to kind of seek out people with whose position you agree with and get connected. It's kind of a generally vague answer, but that's what I do.
Ms. Albamonte, I have a question. From the legal standpoint, I heard Mr. Pomeroy mention this a couple of times. What exactly is DACA and what does it stand for?
DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's for anyone that on, I believe it's June 12th, 2012, was in the United States, had come in as a child and was either a student or had graduated from high school or was in a GED program or had a GED.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I did want to, even though you
Oh, okay,
asked that
that's fine.
question, I was just going to suggest that anybody, part of the reason people aren't passionate maybe just because they don't know all of the issues. And I would recommend I would recommend educating yourself, not just based on social media or your friends or whatever, wherever you may get your news, but educating yourself about the truth about immigration. There's so much misinformation out there. There's a lot of information in the press, on Facebook and a lot of social media. There's just a lot of untruths. So the best thing you can do is find out the truth about the law, find out the truth about the statistics, and then when you do, you'll be much more likely to want to be involved. It's much better to be educated.
I would add too, thank you, that prompted this, ACLU and Southern Poverty Law Center, two excellent sites to go check out developments in this area.
I don't think I need a mic. We've heard a lot about the idea that one immigrant comes in legally and then the next week another member of the family, some people call it chain migration or whatever. Ms. Albamonte, can you enlighten us into the actual process of bringing a family member in once you've done a green card?
Okay, so one of the biggest types of misinformation out there is the idea that if you have a child here, that child will eventually get you status. If you come in illegally and you have a child here, when your child turns 21, that child can petition for you to be a lawful permanent resident. The problem is you have to go outside the United States to pick up your visa. And when you do, you won't be able to get back in because there's something called the unlawful presence bar. Anyone who's unlawfully present for more than, it depends, but up to 180 days. So say you're unlawfully present for 10 years before your child, or 20 years before your child becomes 21, when you go outside to pick up your visa, there's no waiver for you. There's no way to get back in. So the idea of chain migration, back in the day, that was true. Before 2001, you used to be able to do that. You used to be able to come here, have a baby, wait for that baby to grow up. The baby could petition for you, and you never had to leave the country. You could get your green card right here. Well, the law changed, and now that whole thing about the anchor babies and all that, it's just not true for people that come in illegally. Now, if you're a student and you come in legally, and then you get married here, and then you have a baby, or say you don't get married, or say you get married to someone who's not a citizen. You stay here, but if you came in legally, you can adjust your status without going outside. So for those people, it kind of is like an anchor baby. But the number, like I said, there's a lot of people that come in legally and overstay, and there's also the people that come in illegally. But for the people that come in illegally, the idea of the anchor baby, it's just not really a realistic possibility, and it's just one of those fake myths that the press tells you all about.
Mr. Pomeroy, I know you in your bio you mentioned going out of the country a lot of times. For those of us that never been out the country, how's your experience compared to immigrants that you've heard their stories on coming to America?
No comparison. When I traveled overseas, I had the benefit of having a U.S. passport, resources, and support. And I'll give you an example. When we were in Paraguay, my daughter's biological father bribed a judge to keep us from leaving the country, pardon me. And we had to work through, and the U.S. Embassy came to my rescue. And I was really relieved that we had that kind of support. The people that are coming into this country that I'm most familiar with, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, the people who came the hard way, are on their own. They have no recourse. I'll give you an example. Mario, who came and flew into National Airport in the early 80s, he told me, I did an ethnographic study of like 7 men who came into the country without documentation in the early 1980s to understand their experience and to understand the economic impact. Real quick on the economic impact that them coming here had on their families at home in Central America, it was meaningful. The money they earned here, and a lot of the people who came here, the guys that I studied, would live in apartments with 6 or 7 other people. They would work from sun up to sundown. They would live very frugally, and they would send money back home to their families who were not of means. And their work here was able to make great improvements like concrete floors, girls going back to school, because girls are usually the first ones who are yanked from school when there aren't enough funds, protein in their diets beyond rice and beans. And that was one of the things that I learned. And then what I also learned was that their journeys here were incredibly brave and very high risk. So Mario, who came to the airport, had a piece of paper with a handwritten address of a friend who might be able to meet him up in Maryland. So he came in the winter, Guatemalan, never been in snow before, and walked from National Airport up into Maryland, which is about 20 miles, and was able to connect with somebody. Carlos, who was in the military and tired of fighting FARC and the narcos in Colombia, swam on his back across the Rio, literally, and made his way up through, and then was able to bring his wife and daughters up several years later after he established himself. So these are real stories. There's just no comparison. We have it really good, and a lot. If you're coming from Guatemala, years and years of civil war, high government dysfunction. Same with Mexico, high government dysfunction and not a lot of economic opportunity. I understand why people want to come here. And I think, I'll just repeat, I think it's win-win. But the circumstances are very different.
Thank you. Next question.
As regards sort of myths and misrepresentation, I just wanted to sort of be clear, maybe if you could clear something up for me, Ms. Altamonte. I have heard it said that the number of illegal immigrants coming into the country has actually been steadily declining over a period of years, and that a lot of seasonal workers don't actually remain in the country year-round. They actually do go back and forth. Am I hearing correctly?
Yes. Actually, it is. There are a lot of seasonal workers that come in on H-2A and H-2B visas. A lot of landscapers, like around here, we have a lot of pine trees. There are people here that do bring in people, and we have worked with them to bring in workers to come in. They come in seasonally, and then they leave, and then you reschedule them, and they come back again. Some of them, under some circumstances, can bring their families with them when they come, but then they all go back again. Back in I keep saying the old days, back in the 70s and 80s, there used to be guest worker programs that allowed people to come in legally and work. And when you look at old census records, you can see that they moved from down in Georgia, they picked peaches down here, and then they went up to New York and picked apples, and then they went over to the West. And so they do move around seasonally, or they used to, they still do move around seasonally, depending on what the crop is. As far as one of the other myths I was thinking about when we were talking, a lot of people always say, why do people come in illegally? Why don't they just come in legally? Well, if you use, for example, India, China, and Mexico are two of the largest sources of immigration for the United States. And the way the United States has its immigration, each country can only have a certain number of legal immigrants each year. And in Mexico, they're so oversubscribed that they're working on 1997. People that applied in 1997 to bring in their brother, those are the applications that they're working on, because they work on spouses first, then unmarried, then children, unmarried children, and they go down. And only if there's visas left over out of the entire number of visas that there are each year do they get down to, for example, brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. And that goes back also to what we're talking about, the bringing in the family members. You can bring in, usually your parents are considered immediate relatives, and children under 21 are immediate relatives. But once your children get to be 23 or 24, if you're a U.S. citizen and you want to bring over a child that you might have had in another country, it can take, they're working on, I believe, 2014, 2013. I mean, they're still years behind. And my son just married a girl from Mexico that he met on a semester abroad in Spain. It's even with me helping him, it was a very complicated process to get a fiance visa, get her up here. She has to adjust her status. Then 2 years later, she's going to have to, get the condition on her residence removed. And it's just very, very expensive, very, very time consuming, and for some people, not even a real possibility. Did I answer that question? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, not the first half, but the numbers of
The
the
numbers?
number of illegal immigrants coming in. I heard that had been declining for some years.
Well, there was a rumor that it was declining because a lot of people, there's a lot of other places you can go. A lot of people go to Panama and Costa Rica, and even a lot of people that are deported to El Salvador are now going to Costa Rica. So there are places where people speak English and where people feel less threatened than they do in the United States. I don't know personally the statistics, but when you're looking at statistics, make sure you're looking at, are they talking about overall illegal immigrants? Are they talking about people that came in legally and overstayed, along with the people that came in illegally? Are they talking about people that were paroled in legally because they don't have status? So I don't know what numbers or what statistics they're talking about, but there are reasons for people to not come in as much because it's not as, from their perspective, not as friendly to them. But there's plenty of people coming in.
Questions?
Hello. I grew up surrounded by immigrants back in South Florida, and something I always noticed were people were afraid of, such as ICE, and that was always a constant fear. And I never got the chance to look into what exactly ICE does. So may you elaborate that for me, please?
So, Homeland Security has a couple different agencies within it. They have USCIS, which when you want to come in legally, you want to be a DACA or something like that, you're filing your application with USCIS. The people at the border are also part of Homeland Security. That's CBP, which is Customs and Border Patrol. They're the people at the border that people typically see, and there's other entities within that. There's also Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Those are the people that are, there's different parts of ICE. One of them is Homeland Security Investigations. Those are the people that typically go out and conduct the raids on work sites that they know are employing people that are illegal. And then within the prisons and things like that, there's something called enforcement and removal officers. Those are the guys that actually get on the airplane and fly back. When people are being deported, a lot of times they will send officers with them on the airplane to wherever they're going. to facilitate their arrival. That's some of the different parts within ICE. So their job is to basically enforce the law, make sure the immigration laws are enforced. Within ICE, there's something called the Office of Chief Counsel. That's the largest lawyer organization entity within Homeland Security. It's got hundreds and hundreds. It's got 26 different offices all over the place, and there's I don't know how many different lawyers within those people. And those are the people that are prosecutors. They're like DAs. They go into immigration court and they're trying to get the people deported. And then you have defense attorneys. And I used to be one of those people, and now I'm a defense attorney, and I go in against the people that are the Office of Chief Counsel lawyers, and I try to defend people from getting deported. Does that help? Any other questions? Any other?
Thank you for answering my first one. Another extension of what I've seen growing up, and you touched on it a bit regarding how long it takes for applications of immigration to be processed. Do you believe there are ways to ease applications or encourage illegal immigrants to apply? Because I'm afraid when I was growing up, many didn't apply because they knew how long it would take and the difficulty of the exams that you might have to take as part of the application. Of course, I don't know as much information regarding the application process, so I'm curious as to if you could elaborate on the application process and your opinions on easing it.
One thing that they could do to ease it is they could increase the numbers that they allow in each year. For example, they have they have a certain number of refugees in each year, a certain number of these different levels. If they eased it up, that would help. If they started processing faster or opened other offices to process. The one thing about USCIS is everything is based on fees. So when the government closes, USCIS never has to close because they're paid for, all of their people are paid for by the fees you pay for your immigration services. So USCIS never closes when the government closes. A lot of people are afraid of the naturalization exam, and that's, they might be lawful permanent residents for 20, 30 years, and they never become a citizen because they're afraid of the citizenship test. The citizenship test is not that hard. They basically ask, you have to, I think there's 12 or 20 questions you have to answer, but basically they just keep asking you questions till you get to the 20. They don't really, as long as you get 20 of the 50 they ask you, I mean, when you get to 20, they stop asking you the questions. It's not that hard. And there's also for people that have like mental deficiencies or they don't speak, they're elderly, they don't even have to take the test. So there's a lot of ways that they have tried to ease the process for people. And one of the biggest problems everywhere, whether you're detained, not detained, is the amount of misinformation that people hear. And also it makes my job hard because if I tell them something and then they're like, well, my friend's brother told me that this was the correct answer. And they don't want to believe the truth. So that's the biggest problem is.
I have a question. From both of your perspectives, how have you observed any? Well, have you observed any noteworthy changes regarding public opinion toward immigration over the years?
So I've seen it worsen in the past 2 years in particular. But it's interesting, while on the national level, there's a lot of rhetoric and harshness about immigrants and immigration, what I've found in Southwest Georgia has actually been reassuring. This is an area that depends on a lot of labor. And what I find is if you go local, even more conservative people, I find that there are a lot of people who actually have a grasp and a compassion and an understanding of taking care of the folks who live in our community, regardless of their status. So I'm relieved and hopeful that at the local level, ongoing, increasing your knowledge, dialogue, getting involved, can only help to kind of strengthen what I think is actually America's and the surrounding area is a very compassionate place. And it's really at odds with the purely for show national rhetoric. And I've got personal occasions where I've seen people who you might not expect at stepping up to the plate to defend undocumented workers and people who are here and new to our community.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask the young woman from Texas. I'm just curious what your experience was being on the border and what your what your experience was and attitude towards folks who make the trek and your perspective.
So we grew up, okay, so there was this family there, and it was a father, and he had 4 children, and he brought them over as babies. There was no mother in the picture. And they were all probably like 10 years older than I was, but one of the daughters was actually like our nanny growing up, kind of, and I didn't know that they were illegal immigrants until I was like 12 or 13. So I already like established a relationship with that family without like knowing. So when I found out, I was surprised, but it didn't change my perception of them at all. And now I've just kind of kept up with them, and all 4 of the children have PhDs. And they can't work anywhere, or like they can, but they're not getting paid nearly what they should in their fields. And now they're kind of considering their options, considering going to Canada, and like it's just really sad to me because the dad purchased a home in cash that he made working in the oil field, and I think America is missing out on some really fabulous people. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks.
Dr. Mo.
I'd like for either or both of you to maybe address the concept of criminalizing of immigrants, not in terms of whether what is going on is technically a violation of the law, but the process of criminalization as kind of an identity and what that means, if that makes sense, when people use rhetoric that reinforces criminalization and what that means in terms of how we perceive immigrants, if that makes sense.
Generally speaking, HSI or ICE does not go after people who are haven't come to their attention generally through being arrested. I mean, I'm not saying it's never happened, but it's just not the usual way that it happens, where they say, okay, we're going to raid, the movie theater or something like that to see if there's anyone illegal in here. Generally, people do come to the attention of the authorities. I mean, any day of the week you can, for example, at the prison where I used to work, people that were illegal would come all the time to visit their loved ones or to testify in court. Technically, they could have been picked up there because there are plenty of people that could have picked them up there, but they don't get picked up there. They just don't really concentrate on those people until they come to the attention generally in some other way through actual violation of law. And I know that a lot of people don't think that, and it's not really a horrible thing, the driving without a license. In Georgia, driving without a license, 4 arrests, the 5th one I believe is a felony. So it does start getting serious. You'd be amazed how many people in America that are not illegal drive without a license, because I also work in state court. We have the public defender contract, and every single week there's many people that drive without a license. So it's a problem throughout Georgia, and unfortunately, when you are illegal, that's how you end up getting picked up by ICE, if you get a nice hold. I think that the idea I guess what you're talking about, are you talking about the administration or just,
In general, when people
or people's
create an
perception?
identity of immigrants, undocumented immigrants as criminals, right? For me, to force their identity as criminals is simply because they crossed undocumented.
I think that people, all I would say is, I think people think that when they don't, it's always different for, unless you know someone. And if you know someone, my friend so-and-so, it's fine, but everyone else, not so fine. I mean, I just think that, I think it depends on who you know and whether you know people. And just like anything, everybody has an idea of things that they don't really know about.
Yeah, the words that come to mind are divide and conquer. And stereotyping people is a way to divide and conquer. It's a way to, in my opinion, it's used throughout our politics to convey a stereotype about a group of people that makes them apparently out of line with our societal norms and with what we hold dear and true in our values, which makes them wrong. And so if I want to stay in power, vote for me because I'm going to stand up to the people who are not doing it right. And it's used in race politics, it's used with immigrants, it's used across, I mean, it's not just a United States thing. I mean, you've got Duterte in the Philippines, who is, if you're a drug dealer or a drug user, they're sending squads after you. That's how he is staying in power, is by basically stereotyping, dividing the people, and trying to pull people who believe in law and order and making it seem like it's us or them. And I think it's a very, very destructive element to criminalize immigrants. Personal experience, and I would imagine that the data holds up, that most of the people who come in undocumented are law-abiding. I mean, I can't back it up right now, but I'd be willing to place a substantial bet that most of them are. And so then to cast them as criminals, which current administration does over and over again, one, it's inaccurate, and two, hopefully, I mean, it's inaccurate, it's dehumanizing, which is the issue that I think is really the problem with it, and ultimately it's just counterproductive. And I think it's up for people, it really is important for people here to get educated and understand who the people are who are coming into this country and what they're doing, legal and illegal. It's a huge opportunity to have virtually all of the folks who come in who are willing to work. It's a huge opportunity for this country.
This is a little off the subject, but one thing I will say that a lot of people might be surprised about is the number of people, when they talk about the Mexican border and even the Canadian border, there are huge numbers of people coming in from all different countries in the world. It's not just Central America. There's people from China, people from Turkey, people, you know, a lot of my clients that have been in the detention center, they've all come through the Mexican border, but they've been from Guinea, Uzbekistan, Russia, you know, all these different countries in the world, Pakistan, all through that border also, and then from the Canadian border, Albania, Armenia. So there's just a lot. I mean, it is a problem. A lot of those people, like I said, will come to the border and ask for asylum. So those people are coming in too. And some of them, and I will say one other thing. I think that whether or not you come in legally or illegally, sometimes it's just a matter of who your smuggler is. There's a huge amount of people smuggling that's going on. And a lot of people will fly into Mexico on vacation, the people from China and the people from Turkey, they'll say they're going on vacation, they'll go there, and then they pay someone to bring them to the border. Some of them get lucky and they get brought to the border where they can say, I'd like to apply for asylum. And then the other ones might just get brought to the edge of the river and say, swim. So those people, you know, those people come in illegally, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't have come in the other way had they been given that option.
I think, too, kind of a related element, recent articles that I've read, everybody here familiar with brain drain? Well, we used to be, I think we used to be a pretty attractive place for people with tangible skills, you know, science, I mean, you name it. I think that the current environment dissuades people who have real talent to add to come to this country. And I also, from what I understand, that we are starting to experience potentially a brain drain from the United States. If you've come here, the hostility kind of getting to criminalizing the hostility that we have towards people who aren't from here originally or who look differently. It's not as hospitable of a place as Canada, for example. The other thing, too, that I'll point out is that you can talk to a lot of employers in this area, and we can't fill positions. It's extremely frustrating to have this whole dynamic where we need workers, we need talent, and we're enacting policies and stereotyping people and classifying people in a way that is, for me, self-defeating for our country, just practically speaking.
I'll also say that because of the internet, a lot of people don't have to come here to work. You know, even people that are U.S. citizens, a lot of them, my son, his goal is to leave and live somewhere pretty, you know, somewhere else where he can speak a different language. You know, he wants to live somewhere overseas. A lot of people don't have to stay here, whether they're U.S. citizens or anyone else, like he was saying. Also, there's something called the H-1B visa, which is for people that have advanced degrees. The U.S. government has made it so difficult to get an H-1B visa that a lot of companies will pay big money to try to get the H-1B, and it's based on a lottery. So you might pay $5,000 or $6,000 to get your candidate into this, try to get into this program, and if they don't get picked in this lottery, essentially, then you've paid all that money for nothing. So the U.S. government's made it super complicated for people to come in legally, and then is very critical of people who come in illegally at the same time.
Last thing I'll add to that, just having lived here in Florida, is to get involved. There are tons of movements from the south of Florida up to Georgia, farm workers in particular, easy to Google. There have been a lot of farm worker support movements down in South Florida in particular for lettuce, for tomatoes, trying to, and if anybody doesn't know, most of the fruit that's on our plates is picked by immigrant laborers who live in very, very difficult, challenging conditions. But if you want to get involved, take a look at the farm workers movement in the South Florida region, and tomatoes. And there was a grocery chain. I can't remember the grocery chain.
Publix.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was really loud.
No, it's good. Publix. There's a lot of potential activity, and there's a lot of need for people to get involved to support immigrant farm workers.
Hi. So I actually have a question too. So the 2020 census is coming up, and they're actually proposing a new question to add to the census. It's going to be about citizenship. So there's been a lot of debates about whether or not that is going to be a positive thing for people to actually answer on, right, regarding their citizenship status. I was hoping that you could speak a little bit about the kind of like benefits of that, or maybe the negatives of it.
I think that's always been a question. Well, it's certainly been, I mean, because I look at a lot of census records, just trying to figure out whether someone's a citizen or something like that. You know, we sometimes go back and look at to try to make sure that they might be a citizen, you know. I know that they asked place of birth, and I believe they did ask citizenship or status before.
Yes, the new question is going to ask if you're undocumented, if you're documented, what your, I guess, if you have like a green card, or kind of what title you hold as a documented person. And so it's more specific.
Honestly, I think that, number one, I don't know that they necessarily get true answers out of that. I mean, they could just leave it blank, or in a lot of census comes in, it's written. It goes to households, and then they just complete them. It's not like the old days where so they do that to some extent, travel around and try to catch the people at home and ask them the questions. I mean, I think it is problematic, but I mean, it's maybe I don't know that it'll give accurate results.
I was listening to NPR, and I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, it's kind of in some ways, it's a reasonable question because you guys know the census data legally can't be used for anything else except for compiling data, which is great as long as the people who control the data are abiding the laws. And I think that's my biggest concern, is I understand the need. It would be good. It's a fair question. But the current circumstances and the way that our government is under siege, I would actually be I'm troubled by it because I don't think the intentions are pure. And I would be surprised if people are really comfortable answering accurately. I wouldn't if I was in a compromised position.
Well, I have a question. A legal question is actually. What's the penalty for the smugglers? I know you mentioned smuggling. Do you deal with the cases pertaining to smuggling, or is it?
Yeah, actually, it is actually, there's a couple things that can happen if you're a smuggler. Number one, if you're a smuggler and say you're coming in and you decide you're a lawful permanent resident and you're driving up to the Mexican border and someone says, "Can you bring my daughter back?" and just pretend it's your daughter and use your daughter's passport. You can lose your lawful permanent resident status and get put into removal proceedings by smuggling over somebody's child, for example. There's an exception. There used to be an exception for smuggling your own child, but you can also get in trouble for allowing someone else to smuggle your child. You can be charged with alien smuggling, which I don't really know the exact penalty for that, but it makes you removable or deportable, and there's also a federal penalty for it.
Can I ask? I need to ask you a question. So I had the opportunity to go to the Stewart detention facility with my wife, who works in the Paraguayan consulate, to visit a Paraguayan prisoner who, according to him, deserved to be in jail. And we worked with him, and my wife helped facilitate him getting back to Paraguay. He was due for release. But over the years, I've come to learn that the Stewart detention facility is a private corporation, and its revenue is derived from filling beds. And I'm just if you could explain what the detention facility is it run by a private corporation and how it operates? And just so you all know, it's less than an hour from here, tucked neatly back in the middle of nowhere, out of view.
Well, that's because most people don't want prisons to be in view, but no. The contract, okay, so it's right now, it used to be called Correctional Corporation of America, CCA, and now it's called Core Civic. They are private, there's another one called GED. They are private corporations. They privatized a lot of the prisons in the United States in general. As far as the contract for the beds, actually the Stewart Detention Center, they charge probably less than anywhere else because of where it's located. It's not in a big city. It's not close to a big city, but they have to pay whether the beds are filled or not. So they don't have to. They aren't seeking to fill extra beds to line their pockets, because whether there's 1,700 people there or 1,500 people there, they're going to pay for 1,900 people. So that's how it actually works, because I was involved with the contract.
So there's no incentive one way or the other to move people through the system quickly.
What they sometimes do is they move people. There's a place in Folkestone now. They move people from one facility to the other. They try to keep people, for example, that are have to go to court or more serious criminals at Stewart. And then the people that, for example, came in as asylees, they move those guys to Folkestone, and then they go through the process through Atlanta by VTC. They kind of move the people around. Is that the question?
It's a long process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long process. It takes probably 9 months. It takes about, if you go through the asylum process, it takes about 3 weeks after you get there to get your notice to appear. Your first hearing may not be for another 2 weeks. You hire a lawyer, that's another 2 weeks. You file your application. It could be 9 months or more by the time you get your hearing, get your decision, you appeal it, it has to come back, so it takes a while.
I have a question. If you can make one change to our current immigration policies, what would it be?
Actually, I think we should have a guest worker program. I think that the problem that we, and I know that President Bush tried to reinstitute that several years ago. I think it's a big mistake. The guest worker program could apply to people the people that are the H-1B people that I was talking about with the advanced degrees, as well as the people that are just coming in to work in the fields. I think it's a mistake not to utilize a program that allows people to work legally and also to help the economy. In addition, I would encourage every state to allow people to get driver's licenses, because you can keep track, if your goal is to keep track of who's here legally or illegally, a driver's license with a photograph is a good way to do it, and it keeps people from getting pulled over for driving without a license, which is one of the more common things that people get pulled over for that gets them in trouble. It also allows them to work, get a job, drive, and a lot of those other things. That's what I would.
I'd probably do two things. I would find a way to humanely close the border on the south of the country. Instead of turning it into a hunting mission, I would try to slow down immigration through that dangerous zone, but do it in a humanitarian way, not with the wall. And then guest worker, and really find a way to bring the existing population into the formal economy and out of the shadows, and then implement a comprehensive guest worker program.
And I will say, I do think that one of the things that we're up against is the fact that a lot of these drug cartels have now gotten into the alien smuggling business, and it's a very, very lucrative business for them, and it's going to be very hard to get them out of the habit of doing it. I mean, the people from Guinea or Brazil or all these people, you'd be amazed at how somebody from Africa gets here. They go to Brazil, then they go, then they go into Nicaragua. They walk through forests, and they go, get transported in various different ways, buses and cars and all this kind of thing, to get to the Mexican border. But the smugglers are very convincing. This is all you have to do, and we'll facilitate everything. And basically, the people just are along for the ride. They pay their money and they just go through the process, and it's going to be very hard. The cartels are used to making a lot of money doing it now. There's also a lot of, one of the reasons that the government does detain people at the border initially is there are people coming in from these countries that some of the kids have not been vaccinated. They might be coming from countries that don't have the same types of vaccinations. They may be ill. They may be dehydrated. There are a lot of horrible rumors about what happens at the border, but part of what they're supposed to be doing is making sure that everybody's healthy and able to come in. That's what they used to do at Ellis Island. When people used to arrive at Ellis Island in 1900, they had a whole hospital there where they took care of people that had medical issues, and some of the people that had contagious issues or some kind of issues that were not curable, they might send them back right from Ellis Island. They never actually came into the United States. Same with Angel Island in San Francisco. So there's just a lot. It's just such a huge issue, notwithstanding the wall issue. It's very, very hard to stop this the alien smuggling.
Mr. Pomeroy, I know you spoke on building a more humane border. What are some suggestions that you all have aside from the proposed wall to build on the southern borders?
I think that we need to give a lot more funding to Border Patrol. I think we need to expand the numbers of people. I think they're overworked and stretched pretty thin, and they have to cover a very, very large territory. And I think that having known a couple of Border Patrol agents, that by and large they're good people doing a very hard job. I think they need more resources. I think there needs to be better interaction with local charities and local support groups across the border. I think the ranchers who live along the border, I think their voice needs to be heard. And I think the vigilante militia groups need to be reined in, and border control left to trained law enforcement.
All right. the time has come to bring today's discussion to a close. I would again like to remind students that tonight's event was a Windows to the World sanctioned event. If you would like to earn Windows to the World credit, please be sure to swipe in with one of our Windows to the World representatives at the back room. And be sure to complete the program assessment that will be sent to you by email. I would like to thank the members of our panel for volunteering their time and expertise for this event. I would also like to thank all the people who worked to make this event a reality, including the members of the Panorama Planning Committee, Bob Slinker, and the Information and Instructional Technology Department, and the faculty, staff, and administrators who supported Panorama in various ways. Most importantly, we would like to thank you all for being a part of this discussion. Thank you and have a good night.